Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Diana, Princess of Wales.
Morte della principessa del Galles, Diana. La principessa che aveva 36
Erkek
anni.
arkadaşı Dodi Fayed'in kaza sonucu yitildiği
Died late last night in a car crash in central Paris.
On August the 31st, almost 5 years ago, 3 people died in this mangled car wreck. They included Diana, Princess of Wales, her lover Dodi Fayed, and the driver, Henri. But do the circumstances of the crash support the parish judge's conclusion that alcohol, drugs and high speed caused the fatal accident? Was Henri really drunk at the wheel? Was the blood which was produced in evidence even his? Dodi's father, billionaire and Harrods department store owner Mohamed Al-Fayed, is certain that's not what happened.
It was a plot, conspiracy to get rid of Diana and my son. And I am not going to rest until get the truth.
These are damning accusations which, if true, point to an unprecedented conspiracy and a massive cover-up. Are they the accusations of a grieving father, or is Mohamed Al-Fayed justified in what he claims? Certainly a besieged royal family had lost public respect and had shown growing hostility to Diana. In December 1995, the satirical magazine Private Eye summed up the royal family's by then well-established hatred of Diana with a classic cover showing the Queen sighting down the barrel of a machine gun and saying, "I don't think a divorce will be necessary." In death, that hostility continued, so that authors Peter Hoonan and Derek McAdam in their book Who Killed Diana commented, "In the days following Diana's death, the grief in London, as in every other town and village, was palpable. The sense of growing anger that this grief was not reciprocated by the Queen and her immediate family created an anti-monarchy surge throughout the country. The only flags in the country not at half-mast were those above the royal palaces, with Buckingham Palace a particular source of offence appearing on TV almost nightly. The row over the funeral arrangements laid bare the depth of animosity which the royal family felt for the princess. The royal family had to be persuaded by the Prime Minister himself and was forced by intense pressure from newspapers not only to give her a proper state funeral, but to extend the route of the procession to allow for the demand to be satisfied for mourners to attend. Huge screens were set up in Hyde Park so that 2 million people could watch the procession. The cortege was almost brought to a halt by the deluge of flowers which were thrown at the hearse by the dense crowd lining the route. The flowers piled at Diana's home in Kensington Palace could be smelled a mile away. Recognising the deep love between Dodi and Diana, evidence of which had filled the newspapers so many weeks before their deaths, people turned up at Harrods to lay wreaths and flowers to their memories. Hundreds also turned up to the funeral of Dodi to support his grieving family and their tragic loss. Almost 5 years later, it's now easy to forget that the royal family was in a state of siege. The Queen herself gave a glimpse of her feelings when in her Christmas broadcast in 1996 she talked of her horrible year. Prior to Diana's death, the royal family had their backs to the wall, and it was Diana they blamed. For the first time, the Queen had been dragooned into paying tax. The Duchess of York had become a figure of fun. 3 of the Queen's children were divorced. The royal yacht Britannia had been decommissioned and was not to be replaced. Part of Windsor Castle had been burnt down, and the Queen had been forced, against her will, to pay for its renovation. All this bad news had taken its toll. Led by Prince Philip, the royal family was fuming. Over a period of 5 years, the popularity of the royal family had sunk to an all-time low. Over a third of people blamed Prince Charles for having done the most damage to the royal family's reputation and thought that he would make a bad king. Against this, the royal family had watched with fury as Diana's popularity first totally eclipsed them, an unforgivable thing in itself, and then so rocketed that she had become the world's foremost media figure. When this world media icon first showed herself to be in love by appearing in public with Dodi, and then revved up interest even more by hinting at a big surprise to come, media interest worldwide went into overdrive. The media picked up the hint. Were Dodi and Diana about to announce their engagement? Diana had attempted to escape the world media hysteria aboard Mohamed Al-Fayed's luxury yacht in the south of France. But the media had flocked to follow them. The reporters and photographers all knew that if they could get the one big picture to be syndicated around the world, which was so hungry for news, their individual fortunes would be made. Eventually the picture was secured when Dodi and Diana kissed as they boarded the tender to go to Mohamed Al-Fayed's yacht. It was the image which dominated the world media for days to come. Diana knew that the royal family was furious that they had been eclipsed, and she had told a number of friends that she expected to be eliminated. She had been frightened by the death of her friend and bodyguard, Barry Manickay of the Royal Protection Squad, in suspicious circumstances. Her friend James Hewitt had received death threats. She had also told Mohamed Al-Fayed that she expected to be killed, perhaps, she guessed, in a helicopter accident. This then is the background to Mohamed Al-Fayed's beliefs. The royal family were under siege and they blamed Diana for much of their predicament. Prince Philip had been particularly enraged about the relationship between Dodi and Diana. His attitude would make it clear that the idea was unacceptable that Diana, the mother of the future king of England, might marry an Egyptian, a Muslim, and the son of someone who had been so openly critical of the royal family. Mohamed Al-Fayed believes that the security forces reacted to this hostility, that they seized their moment and orchestrated the crash in the Alma Tunnel. In the intervening years, he has spent huge sums of money in conducting an intensive investigation. That investigation leaves crucial questions unanswered, because the authorities in the UK, France, and even the USA continue to refuse to release vital information, thus forcing Mohamed Al-Fayed to proceed inch by inch through the courts in those countries. In the course of the investigations, many other questions have emerged, some of which strike to the heart of our faith in Britain as a democracy. Immediately after the crash, and before the blood samples were even analysed, a massive campaign of disinformation was orchestrated by the security services, which claimed that Henri, the driver of the car, was 3 times over the drink-drive limit.
I never saw the guy drink anything. I mean, he was French, he'd been off duty. The French drink wine at every meal. But in my opinion, he was, you know, there was nothing in his demeanour that would suggest to me that he was drunk. He was exactly the same as he was on the afternoon. Just a nice guy, and he was sober.
Henri Paul passed a rigorous physical exam to renew his pilot's license just 3 days before the crash, and the exam revealed no indication that Paul was a heavy drinker or user of drugs. When French officials finally released a copy of the final autopsy report to the families of the deceased, they immediately engaged independent forensic pathologists to review the written report. Their conclusions are astonishing. Professor Peter Venezes conducted a 12-hour review of Henri Paul's autopsy. His family wanted to know, was there any evidence from the examination indicating Paul was an alcoholic?
No, there was no indication of that at all at the autopsy.
Henri Paul's blood samples were not refrigerated. This raises the real possibility of contamination.
If samples are not stored at reasonably cold temperatures, then you have the added element of the blood actually slightly decomposing and producing extra alcohol within the blood. And this can give you problems with the analysis.
What the blood analysis found has pathologists shaking their heads. Henri Paul's autopsy revealed inexplicable level of 20.7% carbon monoxide in his blood. How did that much carbon monoxide get into his bloodstream? Had Paul showed any symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning before the crash?
The level that was measured in Henri Paul at the time that he died would indicate that say, some 2 hours prior to his death, he might have had a level of 30%. But if you've got a level of about 30%, someone would have a decided headache. You would have real throbbing in the temples. The headache would be unmistakable. There would be certainly a lack of coordination. It doesn't strike me, when you look at the pictures of Henri Paul, of a man who is really suffering. It doesn't look as if he's got a headache. He's not massaging his temples to try and reduce the pain in any way. He seems to be someone who is quite relaxed in his environment, in control. He's talking to people, giving orders.
The official French report of the accident adopted the explanation put forward by the official French pathologist and toxicologist that the carbon monoxide could have come from the airbag. But is this even possible? The statement put up by the French that the carbon monoxide in Henri Paul's blood could have come from the airbags was blatantly ridiculous. Mercedes-Benz point out that their airbags are designed to save life, not to kill, and that they contain no carbon monoxide. Checks on Dodi's blood has also shown that there was no carbon monoxide present. In any event, Henri Paul died instantly. He could not have drawn breath. Is it possible that somehow the blood sample was not Henri Paul's? To this day, the French have refused any independent evaluation of Paul's blood.
The smoking gun for this investigation would be evidence that the blood tested was not that of Henri Paul's. There were 15 bodies in the morgue that night, and the level of carbon monoxide supposedly in Paul's blood would be more indicative of someone who had committed suicide by breathing in a car exhaust. The French government, however, will not release any information about any of the other victims so that we can confirm whether or not the blood was actually Paul's.
Why did the French authorities and the British security services go to so much trouble to blame the crash on the dead driver, Henri Paul? If the evidence appears to be on shaky ground, could it be that the crash was in fact a deliberate act, a conspiracy to murder Diana? Henri Paul was also a keen pilot. Just 2 days before the accident, he completed a rigorous medical to renew his flying license. His medical found no signs of alcoholism. For him, flying wasn't just a hobby. His flight logs show he was a regular flyer, and he had taken courses for flying at night. And all in all, he had completed 605 hours flying time.
He was a good man. No, we never had problem with him, and he was very serious in aircraft, and he make his job very good in flight. He was a good private pilot. He's looking for progressing each time.
But flying is not a cheap sport.
No, a 1 hour flight cost 300 pounds about on this aircraft.
So Henri Paul would have paid £300 an hour.
He paid it.
It seems that Henri Paul led an expensive lifestyle. But where did he get his money? The respected journalist Nicholas Owen tried to answer that question in the independent television film The Secrets Behind the Crash.
Henri Paul's salary at the Ritz was around £20,000 a year, and from talking to his friends he sounds like the sort of man who spent his salary every month. But we've discovered that actually he was much better off than he appeared. Whatever anyone says about Henri Paul, one thing is clear: this was a man with some very big secrets indeed. Apart from 2 accounts in a bank outside Paris, he also had 3 accounts and a safety deposit box here at the Banque Nationale de Paris in the Place Vendôme, just a few steps from the Ritz. Just a short walk away, he had another 3 accounts here at Barclays in the Avenue de l'Opéra. But that's not all. He also had 1 current and 4 deposit accounts here in the Caisse d'Épargne, just near the Louvre. In the 8 months before the crash, 40,000 francs, that's about £4,000, was paid into an account here on 5 separate occasions, each time in cash. In all, Henri Paul had just over 1.2 million francs in the bank. That's about £122,000. and no one can say where it came from. The Ritz Hotel is adamant that the money, the cash, did not come from them. So where could it have come from? I thought it would be a good idea to go back and talk to his best friend, Claude Garrick, who revealed an extraordinary secret about Henri Paul.
All I can tell you is that he had contacts within the French and foreign intelligence services. That's all I know.
Do you know what he used to do for these services? What was he doing for them?
I've no idea. He was very discreet regarding his work.
A former member of French intelligence has suggested that the security managers of major hotels are prime targets for recruitment, and the Ritz, with its glittering guest list of the rich and powerful, would be of more interest than many.
I think it was the entire period when he worked for the Ritz, 11 years. I think he maintained his contacts during all that time.
From your experience over 4 years as an agent for MI6, would you say it's reasonable or unreasonable for Mr. Al-Fayed to express the view he has that the British security services were in some way involved in the deaths of his son and the Princess of Wales?
Well, it's a perfectly reasonable view. I've seen a plan to assassinate another world leader, President Milosevic. This was in 1992, and it was not a detailed plan, but a proposal to assassinate President Milosevic. And yes, they have assassinated people in the past. It's not something that's, although MI5 have gone on public record and stated we do not assassinate people, there's been a conspicuous silence for MI6, the reason being that they do.
What was the Milosevic assassination plan?
The plan was over 2 pages. It was written by a young officer whose name I shouldn't give on camera.
Can they cause a car to crash?
Yes, there's lots of devices. We were explaining the various devices on training in our size training course of devices that can be used against vehicles. Modern vehicles, particularly high-tech sort of luxury vehicles, are packed full of electronics, and they can be disabled by very, very high bursts of microwave radiation, or I don't know exactly the frequency of it, but a very, very powerful burst of radiation. It can knock out, for example, the ESP or the ABS in a car, and the stability programs in a car, and all of those can cause a car to crash as well. Exactly one of the proposals that was used in the Milosevic document. And the combination of the bright light and the tunnel made me think straight away, well, maybe it wasn't an accident.
But would the British security services and the freelance agents they employ really go so far as to kill the Princess of Wales and her lover Dodi Fayed? As we have seen, she had made some very powerful enemies, and she believed she was in danger of her life. Her friend James Hewitt says that after 3 years, Buckingham Palace decided that his friendship with Diana should stop. Then came some alarming phone calls.
When did you get threats? What did they say in them, and what sort of people threatened you?
The threats came in a variety of different forms, some sinister, some just friendly warnings. Patrick Jeffson, private secretary to Diana at that time, warned me off. Her bodyguard and a member of the royal family in person.
Who was that?
I'm not prepared to say. And fairly sinister. One such example is the fact that I was warned that I might meet the same end as Barry Manicky, who was a police officer responsible for looking after Diana, who met his death in a motorcycle accident.
The princess had been particularly close to
Yes,
Mr. Manicky?
she had.
What did the princess say when you told her about that?
Well, she was concerned because she was of the opinion that Barry Manicky's accident was no accident anyway, and she was concerned for my safety.
So she took the threats very seriously.
She did.
John McNamara is Mohamed Al-Fayed's worldwide head of security. He is a former chief superintendent of the British Metropolitan Police and has been in charge of Mohamed Al-Fayed's 5-year investigation into the deaths of his son Dodi and Diana, Princess of Wales.
When Princess Diana and Dodi returned to the Ritz Hotel owned by his father, at about 10 o'clock on that Saturday evening, there was a throng of paparazzi outside the front of the hotel. After the crash, we reconstructed the video footage to show who was actually watching them. And among it was 2 men who have never been identified. And we believe that these 2 men were possibly from the security services. At about 20 minutes past midnight, Princess Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel to return to Dodi's apartment. It's not clear why the couple decided to leave the Ritz. In a phone conversation, Mohamed Al-Fayed told Dodi to stay there that night. The Mercedes was to leave from the rear of the Ritz, while the paparazzi focused on the limo at the main entrance. It was plain that neither Mohamed Al-Fayed nor London Security Control would have approved. Curiously, instead of taking the most direct route to Dodi's apartment from the Ritz Hotel, which was up the Champs-Élysées, it is possible that agents told Paul to drive the other route alongside the River Seine. Henri Paul knew every inch of the road from the Ritz to Dodi's apartment. He certainly would not have willingly taken the Alma Tunnel route, which would have meant going away from Dodi's apartment. As the Mercedes approached the Alma Tunnel, chased by a car and at least 1 motorcycle, his final exit route to the right, to the Champs-Élysées, was blocked by a motorcycle, which forced him to drive into the Alma Tunnel.
Nobody yet knows why Henri Paul took the route to the Alma Tunnel. But former MI6 agent Richard Tomlinson is certain of one thing. Henri Paul was in the pay of MI6.
I know that Henri Paul worked for MI6, the British intelligence unit that I worked for. I saw his name in files in 1992 on an operation that I was working on, and he worked for MI6 right until his death.
John McNamara takes up the story.
White Fiat Uno waiting at the mouth of the Alma Tunnel, and as the Mercedes approached, the Fiat Uno edged over the centre lane, forcing the Mercedes off course. At the same time, a motorcycle pulled in front of the Mercedes, and an eyewitness has said that there was a huge flash which blinded Henri Paul. The combination of speed and the blinding light, along with the intervention of the Fiat Uno, pushed Paul off course, and the Mercedes crashed into the 13th concrete pillar in the tunnel.
For 2 weeks, the crash authorities dismissed the idea that a second car was involved, and finally they admitted to finding a mysterious scratch on the Mercedes that contained paint fragments and bumper material identified as coming from a specially weighted down white Fiat Uno.
It was our investigators, not the French police, who found the Fiat Uno. It was found in a garage in Paris and traced to a paparazzi named James Anderson.
Mohamed Al-Fayed and John McNamara are convinced that some of the paparazzi and possibly the driver of the Fiat Uno were MI6 agents whose mission was to stop the announcement of the forthcoming engagement to which the royal family was so opposed.
Anderson was an Anglophile with close connections to the British. According to Anderson, he was in Paris at the time of the crash, but for some unexplained reason decided to get up at 3:30 a.m., 2 hours after the crash, and board a flight to Corsica from Orly Airport in Paris. The French police and the magistrate accepted an alibi based on a simple gas receipt from Anderson, albeit that the paint and bumper samples from the white Fiat Uno matched those left on the Mercedes.
3 years later, the Anderson story took an unexpected and sinister turn.
Philip Anderson was found burned to death in his car. The car was locked. He could only be identified from dental records.
Then the plot took another startling twist. About a week later, 3 masked men broke into Anderson's office in Paris and shot the security guard.
The burglars spent 3 hours ransacking the office, and despite frantic phone calls from people in the office, the Paris police never attended. In fact, some people in the photo agency actually felt the burglars were from the French security services. Undoubtedly, the security services were looking for photographs taken before, at the time and after the crash, which would show the presence of British MI6 officers there. Sometime later, in fact a matter of 36 hours, a photographic agency in London was broken into, as was the home of a photograph agent.
There were a number of eyewitnesses to the crash, whose evidence raises disturbing questions. One of those witnesses was François Lavichte.
When I drove down here in my car, I was doing 68, 70 miles an hour. I looked back in my rear-view mirror and saw headlights, just like you see now.
Driving a Ford car, he says he saw another car, then the black Mercedes, travelling behind him at some speed with a motorbike alongside.
I'm in the middle of the tunnel. I can see the headslights approaching. You can see the headlights because it's dark. It's night time. You can see the headlights of the car coming with the motorbike headlights, because you can distinguish between the headlights of a motorbike and those of a car. And the motorbike was driving alongside the car. Well, now we can say that it's a Mercedes. Well, anyway, the motorbike, when it enters, when the Mercedes, when it comes, it drives over the crown of the road to enter the tunnel. At that moment, the Mercedes, the motorbike, accelerates. And you can see the acceleration of the motorbike because you can see the headlight rise up a bit. The bike is accelerating. I'm halfway through the tunnel, inside, when the motorbike accelerates, cuts the Mercedes up.
The police have not identified this fast-moving motorbike, even though many witnesses have described it, some in considerable detail. Eric Lee remembers it as it passed him in the first tunnel.
There was a taxi in front of me as we were going down. A Mercedes turned up behind me, flashing its lights at me. So I moved back over to let it pass, and the car went past very, very fast. Very, very fast. I can still remember the sound it made, and it was followed by a motorbike 10 meters or so behind.
This motorbike is crucial because of what François Lavichte says he saw as it drew alongside the Mercedes in the tunnel.
At that moment, there's a big white flash. A massive white light. I'm looking in the rear-view mirror, and it's then, at that moment, that I see the motorbike, and I think to myself, well, I think lots of things. I think, why did the motorbike cut them up?
The flash. Was this flash like a photo flash?
No, it was stronger than a photo flash, or else it was a massive photo flash. It was a big white light, like this one.
Like lightning?
Yes, but quick. And it's then, when you're in the tunnel, and on top of that in the dark, you can see. You're forced to. It's like a radar speed trap, because I've been asked whether it could be a radar speed trap. It's not a radar speed trap, but it was a big radar flash. And it's then that I see that once the flash happens, the Mercedes goes left, right, left.
Initially, Monsieur Lavichte was dismissed by the French police, but subsequently has been called in again by the judge to give his account of the events. Many other witnesses have also described the motorbike, and some the very bright flash. Meanwhile, early that morning, amid all the frantic activity back at the Alma Tunnel, the fate of the most famous woman in the world lay in the hands of French emergency workers. According to media reports, Diana was semi-conscious but had signs of internal bleeding, low blood pressure and difficulty breathing. Yet, for some unexplained reason, it took 1 hour and 43 minutes to deliver Diana to a hospital that was only 3.8 miles away. Why?
Things are slightly different in France than they are in the United Kingdom, but it is rather strange that she was treated for so long at the roadside, as it were, because really, if someone is that seriously ill, the sooner they're taken to a centre of excellence, a casualty department with intensive care, the better.
And the French authorities have also offered no explanation as to why the ambulance took 15 minutes to reach the crash scene on a quiet night.
It is strange. I would have expected an ambulance to be there within 5 minutes. That's what you would normally expect if you had a crash in Oxford Street.
There has also been no explanation as to why the ambulance stopped for 10 minutes when they were just 800 metres from the hospital.
It's a very, very odd thing to do. No ambulance would ever do that in this country, and I believe that no ambulance anywhere in the world would ever do that unless there was a conspiracy.
And the ambulance drove past several other hospitals that were closer to the crash site on its way to the Petite Salpêtrière. Even Diana's medical treatment at the scene has become the subject of some controversy.
According to the doctor who treated her at the scene, she had a ruptured pulmonary artery. Again, how was he to know that she had ruptured one of the main vessels in her body, which is inside her body, unless she was so badly injured that it would be obvious to see? If so, she would be dead already. I really don't know, but the whole thing from the medical point of view sounds very, very strange.
Time was of the essence, but there were tremendous delays. Is it possible that Diana could have lived had she been taken to hospital more quickly? No one knows, and the French authorities refused to cooperate by releasing Diana's medical records. With the paparazzi in full cry, Diana and Dodi headed off for their third and final holiday aboard the Al-Fayed yacht on July the 21st, 1997. Michael Cole, a former BBC royal correspondent, and Mohamed Al-Fayed's former head of communications, tells the story of the events that the Al-Fayed team believes threw the security forces into a frenzy of activity.
They were on their last holiday together on Jonical. The boat put into Monte Carlo, and they went ashore. It was in the evening, and they went to a shop of the company Reposi, and they looked at 2 rings.
She saw on window, and she want this. So we prepare the delivery. I adapt a lot of our models on the character of the client. With Princess Diana was not so difficult.
It was a ring that she could have worn all the time?
Yes, of course.
A diamond ring called Tell Me Yes, a wealthy Egyptian son of a billionaire critic of the royal family, a Muslim to boot, the mother of the future king. The combination sent shivers down the royal spines.
I just thought it was hilarious. Hilarious. The idea of them all sitting there at various castles and palaces having to accept the fact that, you know, one day Diana might marry Dodi Fayed. Just too amusing for words and great payback. But if you ask me if it was deliberate, I think definitely not.
But she just didn't care about their reaction. In a way, that showed a new confidence.
I was just told she was just in love with him. Just fell madly in love with this guy.
I think Diana was killed, but I don't think the people of this country want to hear it. And those that killed her rely on that.
She was in a knockdown, drag-out brawl with the House of Windsor, directly challenging their right to continue to remain on the British throne. This was high politics, not low soap opera. So from the standpoint of the broader strategic question of motive, there's certainly very much motive on the part of the Windsors to want her out of the way, to clear up this succession question.
If we don't have a black ambassador, if we don't have a black minister or a Muslim minister or a tanned minister in this country, do you think we will have a stepfather of the future king of this country?
Ironically, on the day of the crash, the Sunday Mirror published an article describing Prince Philip's views on the Diana-Dodi Al-Fayed relationship. An unnamed friend of the royals reported to the Sunday Mirror. Prince Philip has let rip several times recently about the Al-Fayeds. He's been banging on about his contempt for Dodi as an undesirable stepfather to William and Harry. Diana has been told in no uncertain terms about the consequences should she continue the relationship with the Fayed boy. Options include possible exile, although that would be difficult. That the article actually appeared on the day of the crash makes its final sentence particularly ominous. But now the royal family may decide it is time to settle up. 4 days after Christmas in the year 1170, 4 knights, loyal to the then King Henry II, murdered the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas à Becket, in Canterbury Cathedral. They had been prompted to do so by the rash words of infuriated Henry II. "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Is Prince Philip a modern-day Henry II, with MI6 playing the role of the murderer knights? Prince Philip's hatred of Diana is well documented. Mohamed Al-Fayed believes that MI6 murdered his son Dodi and Diana. He lays the blame firmly at Prince Philip's door.
Prince Philip will never have allowed my son, as an Egyptian, naturally tanned, will be the stepfather of Prince William and future king.
A British Channel 5 television documentary investigated Prince Philip and revealed his early connections to Hitler's Germany through his sisters who married senior Nazi officers. It went on further to expose the sinister background of the man who now stands accused by Mohamed Al-Fayed.
Prince Philip, Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Gluckburg of the Royal House of Greece, was born on the 10th of June, 1921. He was the youngest of 5 and the only boy. In 1931, the Nazis were on the rise. 2 of Philip's brothers-in-law were significant figures in the Nazi party. Philip of Hesse was a good friend of Goering. Christopher of Hesse was appointed head of the Luftwaffe Research Center in 1932 and later worked for the Gestapo and the SS. Philip spent a year with his sisters in Germany. Philip was homeless. Enter the man who was to change Philip's fortunes forever. Another of his mother's brothers, Louis Mountbatten.
Mountbatten was always playing long-term, looking for future advantage for the Mountbatten family. So, although he could never perhaps suspected, it would certainly come off the fact that the young, handsome Philip, looking very Teutonic in a lot of ways, would almost certainly make a very vivid impression on the young Princess Elizabeth.
George VI wanted Elizabeth to have nothing to do with Philip. George VI, I'm afraid, saw right through him. He thought he was basically a ne'er-do-well out to grab his beloved, darling daughter. And King George VI did absolutely adore Elizabeth, there's no two ways about it.
Philip's German ancestry caused concern. Mountbatten was also aware that Philip might be more palatable if he was British. He lobbied hard for Philip's naturalization, and in February 1947, with the royal family conveniently in South Africa, the London Gazette quietly announced Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, RN, had become a British citizen. With a surname and a British passport, all that remained was some unfinished business in Germany. After the war, sensitive documents were discovered in Germany in the castle of Philip of Hesse, Philip's brother-in-law.
As the Allied armies swept through Germany, that kind of material was going to fall into either the hands of the Soviet Union or the hands of the British. And it was the British royal family, in the personages of Owen Morshead, the future librarian, and Anthony Blunt, who were sent out there to acquire the documents and forcibly bring them back to this country so that no one else could find out what it was all about.
Begrudgingly, the king gave in. The engagement was announced on the 10th of July, 1947. In that instant, Philip stepped out of obscurity to become a public figure. Elizabeth may have been in love, but was Philip? On the eve of the wedding, the penniless pawn was promoted. The king would not allow his daughter to marry just a lieutenant. He became His Royal Highness Philip, Baron of Greenwich, Earl of Merioneth, Duke of Edinburgh.
In 50 years, Prince Philip has gone from the arch-modernizer to the arch-conservative. He's now more royal than the royals themselves.
I think he thought that Diana was beneath contempt. When she collaborated with Andrew Morton on his book, he saw all the work that he had done since 1947 to the House of Windsor just blown apart, smashed to smithereens.
I think 1992 was as much an annus horribilis for Philip as it was for the Queen. Behind the scenes, I think he was able to play a more active role than the Queen in the problems of his children's marriages, 3 of which
either broke up or got separated or divorced in the same year.
If 1992 was bad, 1997 would make or break the monarchy.
In death as in life, Philip felt that Diana was a threat to the House of Windsor. He could see her achieving some kind of godlike status. He went out and saw those flowers outside Buckingham Palace, outside Kensington Palace, and he could see a myth being created overnight.
It was Charles who, sensing the mood of the nation, stood up to his father and insisted Diana receive a state funeral. Philip had argued for a private ceremony. For once, he had been overruled. It was a symbolic moment in his life as head of the family.
Just a few weeks after the 5th anniversary of the tragic crash in the Alma Tunnel, a new scandal emerged which has rocked the royal family. As a result, public support for the monarchy has once again fallen below 50%. The scandal was revealed as a result of the arrest and trial for theft of a former butler of Diana, Princess of Wales. The butler, Paul Burrell, was accused of stealing Diana's possessions after her death. The day before Burrell was due to go into the witness box, where he would have been able to give evidence under the protection of the court, an unprecedented, last-minute intervention by Her Majesty the Queen caused the collapse of the trial and, consequently, Burrell's acquittal. Burrell was stopped from giving evidence in court, but subsequently he was paid £300,000 by the Daily Mirror to tell his story. According to the Daily Mirror, Burrell spoke with the support of the palace. The Daily Mail claimed that the accusation of male rape was the real reason for the collapse of the trial. The Sunday Express went further, however, and talked of a palace secret that could bring down the monarchy. The rape allegations were made to Princess Diana by a valet called George Smith, who said that he was raped by a servant of Prince Charles. However, it is believed that George Smith made other allegations of an even more serious nature, and that the Queen intervened to stop those allegations coming out in court. Diana recorded her conversations with George Smith, and the incriminating tape was among her possessions after her death. The whereabouts of the tape are now unknown. Extraordinarily, an anonymous denial of the rape allegation was made by an unidentified servant of Prince Charles, but speculation began to gather around his close personal valet and friend, Michael Fawcett. Fawcett is a controversial figure who was so unpopular that, some years ago, the rest of the Prince of Wales staff said that they would resign if he was not sacked. By all accounts, both Charles and Fawcett broke down in tears at the prospect of him leaving. But the discord was patched up by Charles's friend, the Duchess of Devonshire, and his mistress, Camilla Parker Bowles. On November the 8th this year, the Daily Mail reported, now, 4 years later, Charles talks of Fawcett as indispensable and is known to be devoted to him. However, in the aftermath of the eruption of the scandal, Fawcett has been suspended from his duties. The story continues to unravel, and it is now believed that Michael Fawcett has been offered up to £2 million to tell the full details of his story. In the Mail on Sunday on November the 3rd, the question was posed, can the monarchy ever recover from this shameful attempt to hide its dirty linen? Perhaps the most dramatic revelation to emerge from the whole sordid affair came in the Daily Mirror on November 6th, when it was reported that the Queen had warned Paul Burrell, saying, "Be careful, Paul. There are powers at work in this country about which we have no knowledge." Certainly, if true, this drives to the heart of Mohamed Al-Fayed's fears and beliefs concerning the crash in the Alma Tunnel. Having conducted a 5-year investigation, Mohamed Al-Fayed has concluded that members of the security forces were behind the crash. His claims have been dismissed by the establishment as being without foundation. Now it seems that the Queen herself shares Mohamed Al-Fayed's concerns about the unaccountability of the security forces. There is no doubt that Princess Diana knew precisely what she was doing when she took the tape recordings of her conversation with George Smith. In the weeks prior to her death, it was becoming increasingly clear that Diana was looking to escape from her life of conflict with the royal family. Now evidence has emerged from the Burrell trial and its aftermath that Prince Philip was indeed deeply hostile to her. On the 15th of July 1997, 6 weeks prior to her death, Princess Diana revealed to the Daily Mirror that her boys wanted her to quit Britain. Mohamed Al-Fayed believes that she would have married Dodi and that plans were soon to be announced. Clearly, Diana had something up her sleeve because she told the Daily Mirror that a big surprise was coming. Diana had in her possession, at the time, a tape which contained allegations yet to emerge which are threatening to the monarchy. Princess Diana had often said that she thought Charles could not be king and that the throne should pass to William. These new allegations and the further evidence which is likely to emerge lend increasing strength to Mohamed Al-Fayed's belief that the royal family, headed by Prince Philip, were in a state of utter panic and had every possible motive to see Princess Diana out of the way. As if marrying a Muslim, the son of a trenchant critic of the royal family, wasn't enough, it now looked as if she might make further revelations which could have easily brought down the monarchy that was already directly weakened by her huge popularity as a world icon. Mohamed Al-Fayed views these new revelations with a mixture of sadness and anger. As a result of the stand he has taken, Mohamed Al-Fayed has been the subject of a vendetta by the British establishment. That vendetta has served only to strengthen his determination. He has vowed to devote his energies and resources to bringing the murderers of his son Dodi, Princess Diana and Henri Paul to justice. He is now more than ever convinced that all the evidence of guilt points towards the very pinnacle of British society.
As a father who have lost his beloved son, I have investigated every aspect of the car crash which killed my son Dodi, Diana, Princess of Wales, and their driver Henri Paul. The evidence is clear. These 3 innocent people were murdered. New evidence continues to emerge that support what I have been saying. Diana's 2 butlers, Paul Burrell and Harrods Brown, were arrested and charged with stealing her treasures. Dramatically, the Queen herself stepped in and stopped Burrell's trial. We know that the royal family thinks itself above the law. But why would the Queen give us such a dramatic proof of their arrogance by interfering so directly with justice? I will tell you. It is because the 2 butlers were going to drop bombshell in court. Their evidence was dynamite for the royal family. Diana, Princess of Wales, had kept record of all threats and bullying of Prince Philip. She had also recorded evidence of serious sexual offenses which took place inside the royal household. On one tape is the story of a sex act between a senior member of the royal family and a servant. These stories, if they became public, could be devastating for Prince Charles and bring down the monarchy. The royal family decided to stop Diana using that evidence, so they killed her. Burrell talked about meeting the Queen after the prince died. The Queen said to him, "Be careful, Paul. There are powers at work in this country, but which have no knowledge." A clear reference to the danger that the security forces might murder him. During her last holiday with me and my family in France, Diana told me her life was in danger. She had received direct death threats. She blamed Prince Philip and told me of the proof she had kept in case anything happened to her. On that terrible night when she died, her words came back to me, and I knew that Diana had been right. They had killed her and taken the life of my son as well. I am now certain that Prince Philip was behind the murder of my son. Prince Philip was neglected by drunken parents, and he was adopted by a German aunt who married one of Hitler's generals. And his sister married an SS general. Being so close to the Nazis as a child turned Prince Philip into an arrogant racist who thinks he is above the law. Most of the British people now see this tragedy as an act of cold-blooded murder. They and I and the parents of Henri Paul deserve a public inquiry to uncover the truth. With God's help, I pledge my life to bring Prince Philip and his terrorist thugs to justice before the British people and the people of the world.
After her separation from the prince, it's clear Diana believes Buckingham Palace became openly hostile towards her.
People's agendas changed overnight. I was now separated, wife of the Prince of Wales. I was a problem. I was a liability, seen as. And how are we going to deal with her? This hasn't happened before.
Who was asking those questions?
People around me, people in this environment, and...
The royal household?
People in my environment, yes, yeah.
And they began to see you as a problem?
Yes, very much so. Mm-hmm.